Hey, everybody. For the last few episodes, I've been asking for your help. I'm teaching a new class on accessibility and inclusion in design, and your stories and experiences would be really helpful. And this episode is another good time to ask for your help. So, if you have any experience in accessibility and inclusion in design, you have thoughts about it, you have inspirational stories about it in a way that affected your life, please share them with me so I can include those kinds of topics in my course for the fall. You can email me your insights, experiences, thoughts, and perspectives on accessibility and inclusion in design to feedback@experiencexdesign.com. You don't have to add your name to it. You can ask to have your story shared without attribution. All of that is totally fine. I'm just looking for as many perspectives and as many stories as possible, trying to be inclusive for a class on accessibility and inclusion in design, which seems pretty appropriate. So send those stories, those experiences, those perspectives, those case studies to feedback@experiencexdesign.com. I sure would appreciate it. Now, on to the show.
1, 2, 3. One, two, three.
Hi, I'm Gary David. Welcome to Experience by Design, the podcast where we explore experience designs of all kinds. Hello, all EXDers out there. I just got back from the Customer Alpha event that was part of the broader FTT Embedded Finance Payments and Future event in London, England, put on by VC Innovations. It is the second time I've been part of an event for VC Innovations, and I really do enjoy them. It's a nice mix of broad representation of people doing really interesting things, but in a very kind of intimate environment where you can actually have conversations and get to know people. And I got to know a bunch of people this time around as well. And I'm looking forward to getting back to their next event whenever I get asked and whenever I get the chance. This time around, I was given a keynote, and it was the first time I've spoken publicly about my concept of the unwow, focusing our efforts more on everyday mundane experiences rather than transformative metamorphic experiences. A lot of the experience economy focuses on these transformative experiences, and my point is not that those aren't good or important, but maybe we need to take a little bit of a step back, a little bit of a pause, and focus on the bulk of our experiences, which are mundane ones. And there's a lot more to it than that, so stay tuned for updates as I work on a book on the unwow. While I was in London, it wasn't just all work, there was some play. I was able to go to the Tate Modern Art Museum. This was quite the shift after visiting museums in Florence with all of the Renaissance representational art. One of the interesting differences between the two is that the art in Florence often was made for patrons who were commissioning artwork to please others, or they were working on commissions uh, to please patrons who were paying them to make that art. The art in the Tate often was made by artists who were trying to please themselves by using art as a statement. Art was a vehicle of self expression. And as a result, the artist's statements at the Tate became a key piece of looking at and understanding what the art was meant to represent and the response it was hoping to create. But in both instances, regardless of whether it's Renaissance representational or modern abstract, through art, one can give external voice to one's internal dialogue to create a broader social experience. And that's really good timing because on today's episode of Experience by Design podcast, I welcome Ali Fawkes, the head of social innovation at the social design firm Humanly. Humanly is an award-winning design studio specializing in human-centered design for social impact. On their website, they continue to describe themselves as, quote, specializing in inclusive, creative, and participatory research and design with seldom heard and underrepresented groups. I came to learn about Ali and Humanly through a paper she co-authored on, quote, co-designing the future of respiratory healthcare in a journal titled Co-Design, the International Journal of Co-Creation in Design and Arts, detailing their work and approach in this one project on respiratory healthcare. In our conversation, Ali describes herself as an art kid in school who found an outlet for her own voice through art. She went on to get a degree in fine art from the University of Kent, as well as additional certifications and degrees in secondary art and special and inclusive education from the University of Cambridge, which I hear is a pretty good school. Ali describes co-design efforts she did with students during her work as a secondary school art teacher and educator in schools whose students had special needs. As a parent whose child has special needs, I know a lot about this, and I truly am grateful for people like Ali and the work they do to help students with special needs. She describes her journey from that rewarding work to working with Humanly. We discuss how being an outsider with little knowledge about a setting or industry can be a real gift to having open eyes and ears to learn from people who are often not listened to. Ali discusses the ethical considerations and methodologies involved in working with underrepresented groups, emphasizing, this is important, the importance of truthful representation and co-design approaches. We also discuss the importance of her artistic background as a source of challenging norms and disruption, leading to innovative approaches. And going back to the Tate, there was a whole wing on art for social disruption and social change. So there's a lot to unpack there as well. And if doing social design and impact isn't heavy lifting enough, Ali also participates in strong person competitions, which involves lifting heavy things and sometimes carrying these very heavy things across distances, which is not unlike trying to lift complex problems and carry solutions forward. I always love good art talk on Experience by Design, and I especially love good art talk when it is connected to social impact. I hope you enjoy it as well. Looking at your background, would you describe yourself as an art kid? Because it seems like there's a lot of art going on in your past.
Yeah, very much so. I'm severely dyslexic. So art and making things, like anything hands-on, practical, was always what I enjoyed. I mean, I also like working stuff out, but anything that was, learning by rote, spelling, times tables, all of that sort of stuff is horrendous for me. So I never enjoyed those elements of school, but I always really sort of thrived on the more creative side and anything sort of practical or even just sort of working it out, so sort of actual tangible like maths and stuff. I really enjoyed. But yeah, art, very much so. Went to art school. Loved it. Yeah.
What kind of art were you doing when you went to art school? What was your, form of your medium of expression or your favorite thing to represent?
So my first degree is in fine art painting. So I was a painter, oil paint. I did. My website no longer exists, but it used to all be online. I focused a lot on self-portraiture, but not on like facial self-portraiture. It was very much about like more intimate self-portraiture and looking at like one's body from your own perception and how that can distort. And so I also have a history of eating disorders. So I've got like a whole plethora of stuff there that was explored through my art and how you see yourself versus how other people see it. So I did very large scale paintings of self-portraiture.
Yeah, people always get portraits wrong because when they're first drawing a face, the ears are too low, or the eyes are too big. The forehead is too short. There's all kinds of ways in which without the additional aspect of, body dysmorphia, that we misrepresent how we look because for whatever reason, how we think we look is, in terms of just the way the face is composed, is different than how the face is actually composed.
Yep. So it's a really fascinating area. I loved the work of like Jenny Saville and people. I love Jenny Saville, Tracy Emin. Big fan of a lot of very, powerful female artists. So yeah, very much an art kid.
Very much an art kid. And so, but the thing with art though, there requires a certain amount of diligence. There's the fallacy that some people are just good at art, right? That you pick, you're just artistically inclined. And that might be true because I think we all kind of have different inclinations. To be a good artist requires an immense amount of work and dedication. And there's nobody more judgmental about their work than the artist that created it.
And it doesn't stay. I'd love to say that I could still paint and draw really well. I can't, and it's really depressing. When you try and you're like, I should be able to do this. I used to be able to do this. But because if you've not been practicing, you kind of lose the skill to an extent. So yeah, and then I think because you become very self-critical because you're like, well, I used to be able to do this. I used to be good at this. And now it's nowhere near what it used to be. So then it's sort of just disheartening.
One of the things I find fast, because I've actually studied art instructors working, and because I've always been fascinated, because as an ethnographer, I try to teach people how to see what's in front of them. And art instructors often try to teach people to see what's in front of them, to kind of get the brain out of the way, to get the interpretive part out so that you can render what's in front of you. And I've been around artists who were trained in like this hyper-realism, or very much a figure construct approach of using anatomical landmarks and trying to, sight sizing, and maybe even using a plumb bob to get the exact alignment. And they look very miserable trying to do that. But then the loosening up, the freeing up of the expression, so that you can get something so technically correct that it loses the emotion, so to speak.
Yeah. But there's something about also giving people the tools to be able to do the technically correct. When I was an art teacher, one of my favorite ways to teach and favorite kind of schemes of work that I developed was around getting people to do self-portraits. But I would take photographs of everyone's face and lay a grid over them digitally, and then print out that grid. Chuck Close inspired that, but and the confidence that gives children and young people when if you do just give them a blank piece of paper and say draw your face, it's so hard. But if you give them that breakdown and enable them, give them the scaffolding to produce something that looks like them, it is absolutely transformational. The sort of, the joy they get from it and the kind of confidence they get in, I can do this if I've got the right tools to be able to do this. And then you can kind of move beyond it and get more expressive.
I think there's something really powerful about how that leads into the work that you're doing today, because this idea of removing the self-judgment from the process, because now you have a scaffolding around it. I mean, I think this is why, you might see artists, and I don't know if you did this, turn the canvas upside down or look at the figure or the object in a mirror backwards or hold a mirror up to one side of your face. Anything to kind of complicate the vision process so that your brain gets out of the way. You're drawing, these are elements that together form a face, but you're not necessarily just drawing what you think a face looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I do think I agree. It's actually that whole providing the scaffolding to enable people to essentially come up with the solutions themselves is what our job's all about, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And how did you fork into then special and inclusive education? Because it seems like you're on this art trajectory, and then you went into this other field, which, having, as we talked about, a child with special needs, I can't imagine the challenges associated with teaching in that environment. I know what the challenges are parenting in that environment, but teaching, because I have a child with a certain special needs. You have a classroom of children with very special needs. And then how do you manage all of that? So what was that process like going into that field?
So interestingly, I trained as a secondary school art teacher because I did my degree in fine art. And then you go, I've got a degree in painting. What do I do with this?
Right.
And there aren't that many kind of obvious options. So I was
on D.com, there's not like trained oil painter in the want ads.
No,
that's too bad.
I know it is. It's a challenge, but essentially I was like, well, I'm going to have to actually do something. So I was like, well, I'll go and train to be an art teacher, and then it's a great qualification to have. You can always use it. So I was lucky enough to get into Cambridge University to do that course, and went trained to be an art teacher. Obviously, you have to train. You cannot train in special schools, or you couldn't when I was doing my training. You just train in mainstream secondary schools. And personally, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy school when I was there. As I said, severely dyslexic, bit of an odd kid, didn't fit in, generally did not enjoy the secondary school experience. Turns out I still don't enjoy it as a teacher. And I found it really hard to be in that situation where actually there's a lot of pressure on you to achieve certain grades and achieve, things with those kids, rather than necessarily focusing on the true creativity and artistic kind of thing. It's about getting people through exams in that setting.
Right.
So I didn't apply for jobs straight after. I kind of went, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then a job came up as a supply teacher, as an art supply teacher in a special school. And I was like, well, that sounds good. That is much more. I definitely knew I wanted to work more in that area. So I went and I got taken on a supply basis initially. And in my first day, I was like, this is where I want to be. Like, I think you either go in and you love it and you're like, yes, this is my place. I remember on the first day, one of the kids saying to me, Ali, why are you strange? And I was like, oh, nobody knows that. I don't have the answer. But, good question. And I was just like, yeah, this is the place for me. This is great.
Why are you strange?
Yes.
What's stranger about you?
I don't know, but it was just, I loved that, for me, that directness and that, there's no ulterior motive. It's just direct, straight up. You get asked, someone thinks something, they ask you the question,
Right.
Loved it. And so I then became the permanent art teacher there at the same time as teaching. So I taught art there. So ages 2 to 19.
Oh, gosh.
Art for the whole school. At the same time, I did a master's in special and inclusive education, again at Cambridge, where I was focusing on whether art, student-led art, can be an aid to communication for pupils with severe learning disabilities and autism, so non-verbal pupils. So did that Loved it. Great job.
Amazing. It just made me realize something about myself, which is I enjoyed school to a certain point. And when I was in high school, we would call high school ninth through 12th grade. Did enjoy it at all. Had some friends, but really didn't feel like I fitted in. I went to an all-boys Catholic school, great education, not a great social environment. I did enjoy school, but that was more about me not feeling like I fit in ever because of childhood stuff. And then I go into education as well. It's like, why did I go into education when I didn't necessarily feel like I fit in education? And you were describing the same thing.
It was, I think I thought I might be able to make it better for some pupils. Like I was like, oh, well, maybe, I hated it, but maybe I could make it a nicer place. And then actually you realize that I'm sure there are people who can do that, but it's very hard within a system that is so structured in the way it is.
Art education is a tough racket. The person I'm seeing is an art educator, is an art teacher in 7th and 8th grade. And I can think of no greater punishment from sins of a previous life than perhaps being a 7th and 8th grade art teacher. I mean, it's a lot to take on. It's a lot to take on. And I'm just like, hats off to you. And having been around art teachers, one of the things that becomes interesting for me is the engaging in an activity you love, but that engagement removes your ability to do it because you don't have time and you don't have the resources. I mean, it's hard to be an art educator and find time to do your own art, is my point.
Hugely. Yeah. And that's when it went. Like, that's when I stopped actually being able to do any of my own, really. Yeah.
So you end up in a special school teaching art. It kind of makes me think even about, as you were describing, by the way, how much success did you find in using art for people who are nonverbal?
It was great. I found that, it was very small scale, but there was it was very much about it being also pupil-led art. So, which kind of went against a lot of the thinking at the time around severely autistic young people and making sure everything was super structured. So it was very much around them actually leading the activity and making all the choices and having all of the control about the activity. And, what I found in that circumstance was actually a huge increase in kind of communicative behaviors. And by the end, people even did a representational drawing of a flower, which was the first time, and that can be, a step towards more communication. So I found it really an exciting area to explore, and it very much kind of supported obviously what I'd hoped in a way. Obviously I did that. I focused on that because I thought that potentially art did offer a way for people to, explore and communicate in a less formal way.
It reminds me a bit of art-based research, the whole movement around, especially as your work does it humanly, engaging in underrepresented populations who may not even have, like in your situation, a literal voice, can't speak, or don't feel comfortable or able to articulate, like with small children, their voice. So using art as a medium to conduct research on their lives, on their communities, on whatever it is. And this increasing movement for art-based research as a way of collecting data, understanding people's lives.
We do a huge amount of creative activities in our research because exactly for that. I've never actually made the connection, but we find that creative activities enable everyone to be involved, essentially. And also, like, for all of us, I think if you're engaging in an activity at the same time as you're having a conversation, it can also make it easier and more relaxed to have that conversation. So for some people, the art or the creative activity is the actual communication, and it's the output of that is, the data, if you like. But for other people, it's also a means to help them talk about something. So when people are, do have verbal communication, often, through doing a creative activity, it enables things to be explored or come up, or, and it makes it more comfortable as well, I think, if you're looking at something else rather than just at each other.
It was actually, I had some experience with this. I was working on a project in a bank, financial institution, with a colleague of mine, and her approach was, we were interviewing people about their jobs, and she said, bring some pictures that represent what you think your job is. So I remember one person brought in an image of a conductor, right? Yeah. Or, there was all these things that were pictures, almost like a collaging kind of experience. And then also tell me about how this picture relates to your job, or tell me more about this decision you made here. And that was really an interesting way of getting them to open up and not just be here's question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4. It draws people in more. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, it literally gives people a voice when they haven't as well, in terms of, the work we've done, for example, with the Scottish government, where we were researching with children and young people with complex additional support needs. And we wanted to ensure that all those children and young people who wanted to were able to participate. And that means children and young people who don't have verbal or formal communication tools. So by taking in creative activities and enabling people to participate in that way, it really does give people a voice and an input into what we're doing.
If I was doing research in Scotland, I would need pictures. I've been to Scotland, didn't understand much of what people were saying. I was told it was English. I don't know if it was or not. I'll take it on faith it was English. I remember I arrived in where was I? I was on the west side. I was in Glasgow on a Saturday night and trying to talk to people for directions. Nope, wasn't happening. They're all very nice.
Lovely.
But didn't understand a word.
So Jenny, the founder and director of Humanly, is Scottish.
Oh, brilliant. That's smart.
And she is from just outside Glasgow. So if I ever have any trouble, then she is able to, help me in terms of understanding. But we've done quite a lot of work in Scotland, so I'm all right now. But
can you do the accent, or do you not even try?
No,
right.
Don't dare. No.
It's a tough one. I mean, I got a little bit of an ear for it when I was over there. I wasn't over there long, but I remember I was at one bar and talking with this one young lady, and she was from Australia, and she was translating my conversation with her uncle. So he was talking with a Scottish accent to her. She was translating an Australian accent to me. And then I would go back to her with an American accent.
Wow.
And there was a lot going on that night. So pictures would have been helpful, like a storyboard.
Yeah, creative activities would have helped in that situation.
Oh, totally. So how do you go then from special education and into doing design work? What was that jump?
So essentially, I went from teaching art to then teaching at a different school, but teaching a sensory curriculum to children and young people with profound and multiple learning disabilities. And then essentially, I just decided to leave teaching. I found that the longer I was, it's very hard, in my experience, to progress as a teacher while maintaining classroom time. And it was working with the kids that I loved. And it was hard to see like a progressive career where I'd be able to maintain that classroom contact and actually doing that sort of creative work. So I decided to leave teaching, and I went and worked with adults in a sort of almost consultancy role, where it was about making sure the views of adults with learning disabilities and autistic adults in a local authority area were feeding into that local authority and the decision making in that area. And then from there, I went and was Asperger's syndrome project officer for the University of Cambridge. So sort of working for the support of autistic students at the university. And then the way I got into human-centered design was the charity that I'd worked at in between, like being a teacher and being at the university, were starting a project, a design project for a digital platform for people with learning disabilities. And Jenny Parker, founder of Humanly, was brought in as the designer and said, I need someone to work alongside me because I've not worked with people with learning disabilities before. So they got me in as a freelancer, as a sort of learning disability and autism sort of specialist to work alongside Jenny. And initially I was like, what is this? I've never come across human-centered design. I didn't understand it. I was used to research in a much more kind of, traditional sense.
Right.
But I worked alongside Jenny for like 18 months on that project. And I always call it like my HCD apprenticeship, because obviously I went through the whole process at her side, but we also had to work together very closely because she'd not worked with people with learning disabilities or autistic people. So she, I had to sort of share those skills and she had to share her skills, and together we came up with this process. And actually the process that we went through and we developed won the UX UK or UK UX award for the research and design process that we went through. And I've never left. Essentially, I was a convert. I felt like I'd learnt things through that process that even though I'd been brought in as this supposed sort of specialist or expert, I learnt loads of stuff about that I knew that I'd been wrong about. All these sort of traditional or accepted ways of working with people that were supposedly making things more accessible or supposedly getting people's views. I learnt that actually half of them weren't at all. They were almost performative in like it made it look like you're getting people's views, but actually you're not doing anything that does truly learn about people's experiences. So by learning that I was wrong through that process, I was absolutely bought into this process. And Jenny, when she founded Humanly, brought me on board as the first Humanly employee, and I have been there ever since.
So is that on your ID badge? Does it say that, like ID badge number one?
I do have a mug that says Employee of the Month, but it's got no month or year on it.
Yeah, just perpetually.
So I go with that. Yeah.
Makes sense. I remember I was talking to a CX professional before, just in general, about getting customer feedback. And one of the things we were talking about is the problem that companies face with customer feedback is that once you get it, now you're responsible for it. And so better not to ask, or better to ask in a numerical representation that we can then make up a interpretation of, than actually talk to them. I mean, so getting to this point of what you find out when you actually ask the people themselves and engage with them in ways that they allow them to communicate. Now you're faced with a decision, right? Do I question everything I thought was true and get rid of it? Or do I just stop asking and go with what's comfortable and what we know how to do?
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'd followed my previous sort of way of working and gone into that project, I would have been asking people direct questions about what they wanted about a digital platform. But by going through the human-centered design process and actually going, being made to go back to find out what is the problem, what are we trying to solve, I was made to go so much deeper and learn so much more. And, we had to change direction, and as you should when you find out that actually, the problem isn't necessarily what you thought it was. So, yeah, it was an amazing opportunity, really.
Yeah, I like how you talked about this idea that it didn't follow like the normal scientific method research design, that is very linear. And we have this thing out of sociology called grounded theory by Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss that goes into this loop of analyzing the data and respecifying the research question or the research problem. And you continue to do that for as long as you do that until the project's done, or you publish the paper, or you reach a sort of conclusion. But there's an important element of, if we become more informed through our process, we should then apply that to our original question, not just spit it out the back and then start all over again in the next project.
Yeah. Yeah. So we reframed the question partway through, based on
Right.
what we'd learned. We then went, okay, actually, this isn't the question. The question is, how do we enable people with a learning disability to share their experiences with people in power, rather than how do we build a digital platform to inform policy? And actually, that wasn't the right question, because what you're going to get is likely something that's going to ask people questions about specific things that are really challenging for people with learning disabilities to answer, rather than actually enabling people to share their day-to-day experiences and then be able to kind of translate that and use those experiences to inform what happens.
I just kind of backtrack a little bit. You mean you said that you're severely dyslexic and you went to Cambridge, which I heard is a good school. I've heard good things about Cambridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard good things. But so like that process, I mean, you yourself have gone through this process of having to fight a system, so to speak, I mean, you said you were lucky enough to get into Cambridge. I'm sure luck had nothing to do with it. One doesn't luck into Cambridge. One has to work hard to get to Cambridge. And so your own process of applying yourself in ways that didn't fit the standard educational model because you couldn't, to construct new ways to support your own learning, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, it is very different getting into Cambridge as a postgrad than as an undergrad.
But still.
It's very different, but
I don't know. I mean, let's put it this way. I don't know how it is over there, but I couldn't get in there as a undergraduate or a postgraduate. And how do I know this? Because I applied at some really good schools for postgraduate and they didn't let me in. So
I think partly because of how the application process worked at that point, in that I think it relied a lot on an interview. So on your degree, so currently what you were doing, and then obviously I was studying fine art, so my degree was not very sort of focused on the things that I found challenging. And then the interview was very much, it was a big part of it. And being dyslexic, I'm generally all right at, talking and explaining myself verbally, but it's a lot more challenging on paper. And I think, I mean, obviously there was I'm sure there would be personal statements and stuff like that I had to do, but it was all right.
Did you have to write something up for a final project, for a thesis or something like that?
Yeah, I had to do a thesis, and then obviously at my master's, I also had to do a thesis. It's just kind of getting people to help with the spell checking and all of that. Turned out, and spell check isn't always that helpful, because if you don't understand what the spell check is. So actually my master's thesis, until very close to the end, had a lot of talk about severe autism rather than severe autism, because spell check won't pick it up, because it's or certainly at the time, spell check wouldn't pick that up because it's a correct spelling of our word. It's just not the correct word that you want.
No offense, but English is such a ridiculous language. I don't know how anybody learns it. Like, if you're not a native English, I'm a native English speaker, I can barely do it. But people from other countries who are coming in with language systems that make sense, and then they have to learn this one. I'm like, how?
Awful.
It really is awful, but it kind of goes into this idea of learning adaptive technologies or learning assistive technologies like spell check or like Grammarly or whatever it is, because on the one hand, students should know how to use proper grammar, spelling, things like that, but on the other hand, there are conditions that make it really difficult to be able to do that. And so we might not think of, I was just at a conference for learning technology or assistive technologies in education, and we don't think about spell check as that, just like we don't think about reading glasses as a disability tool. But it is. But they are.
And at least they've become more intelligent. So if you do write sever rather than severe, it is likely to pick that up now. Whereas before, you then had to have someone proofread it who was able to go, no, that's not right.
It's yeah. I was looking at all the work you all do, and I took issue with one of them. I
Okay.
found one of them to be very offensive.
Yep.
That it was developing new approaches to supporting people over 50 into work. Now, as a
Okay.
person who's 55,
Yep.
I am resisting being a special category.
Fair play. Fair enough.
I'm like, wait a second. People are we, because I'm looking at what humanly does and underrepresented or seldom heard groups. And it is funny to think of myself now. I mean, I can move into an over 55 community here in the United States to be in this category that needs additional assistance. It's just weird as an identity move for myself personally.
It's fair enough. I think we all felt it doing that project, that we were like, we're quite close to this slightly older worker group. So yes, unfortunately, that was the definition given to us, as that was the category. You know, it was over 50 was what we had to look at, and they were But I agree. I mean, I like to think 50 is not old.
I would like to think so, but it does raise our attention. I made a video about a story that I saw a few years back about the percentage of people who feel that they're the victim of ageism in the workplace in the United States. And it was like 96%. And these are people over 40 who were thinking that. And so some industries allow age to be seen as a positive, like being a professor, possibly being a doctor, a medical doctor. I'm sure the clergy, I'm sure there's a bunch of others, but other industries, being that old means you're completely obsolete.
Yeah. And also, like you said, it's also about perception, isn't it? You know, we heard doing that project, we heard a lot about people doing things like removing if people had set up an email address and it had the year they were born in and stuff, they were removing it because they felt that if they had that, then people viewed them negatively because of their age. It was an interesting piece of work.
Sorry. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, what was particularly interesting about that one for me, from my perspective, was I learned, and one of the things I love about my job is essentially every project I learn something new. But with that one, I felt like I learned so much more about the impact of the commissioning and contract monitoring system on any service that is delivered in a structure that has a commissioning and sort of contract management system. Because, we learned about all of the challenges that exist with kind of existing or what existed at the time in terms of the commissioning processes and things like payment by results as a contract management system and the way that impacts how services are delivered. So for an employment and support services, for example, about how people potentially have to prioritize who they support, because if you've got targets about getting numbers of people into employment, and that's how you are or your service is monitored and paid, then you are obviously going to be under pressure to do that and reach those targets, which mean that you are going to have to work with people you're going to be able to get into employment potentially, and people who are going to be very challenging to get into employment quickly. You may be disincentivized to support them as well.
Gotcha. And what I love about that example is that it does lay bare the systems element of all of this. I mean, you humanly deals with complex social problems.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like A/B testing. I'm sure there might be some of that, but it's not like, oh, what color should we make this button? It's, how do people over 50 get engaged in the workplace? Or how do we help people with, pulmonary or, respiratory issues or people with, special needs? These are big problems. And so once you start peeling back the layers, the complexity starts to reveal itself. And then you're sitting there going, oh boy, what do we take on? Because there's a lot happening here.
Yeah. It's everything's always complex, and it can be challenging as well because it's also so multi-layered, and where funding comes from and how much control different parts of a system have. And, in our experience, obviously, most people who work in these sectors have the best of intentions and want to do the best of things.
Right.
If you work in employment support, you want to be supporting people into employment. However, if there are these, systems that are put in place that mean you have key performance indicators, to do X, Y, and Z, there is a limit to what people can do within the constraints of systems that are put in place, and that makes it challenging. And then what I found really interesting about that particular example was when I was looking into it and kind of the impact of things like payment by results and some of the practices that generates. Like, there were reports going back, frankly, sort of, I'm sure it was decades, that were illustrating this and highlighting this. And I was like, hold on, if this is known and it's been known for so long, why are we still doing it? And like, why is it still happening? And new services and systems are kind of brought out as if they're going to be the solution, but you're putting it into the same commissioning process, which then has the same results. And then you have to make another new system. And it's like, it's just a self-perpetuating cycle.
One of the things you just made me think of a term that I need to start using. And again, this is a term that I can't spell because it's a hard word. But this necessary naivete. You know, people, and this is what I find as a sociologist when I go into places, I'm like, well, wait, why is it, this is how it works? Why this makes no sense. And people are like, well, yeah, this is how it works. So being intentionally or necessarily naive becomes a crucial resource because it starts to uncover and unveil the taking for grantedness that most people treat these system dynamics and processes as just, you know, how it is or how it works or how it should always be.
Yeah,
until
absolutely.
You show up and go, why is that happening?
Why is it happening this way? And why does, you know, and even in the commissioning world, obviously I knew nothing about commissioning until I worked on that project. And then I'm asking, I'm looking into it, but you start kind of, because as an outsider, it's like, this doesn't make sense. And because I'm naturally inquisitive, to put it mildly, I will then go and dig out, like, well, what does the legislation say and what do the rules say? And is it really true that you have to do X, Y, and Z? Because it's what you hear from people who are doing it. It's like, oh, well, no, it has to be done this way. And then you go and dig out, actually, what are the things? And, you find that what's happened is over years, like, more and more stuff's been added, but none of the old stuff's been taken away, for example. So you just end up with these incredibly big and clunky systems.
It kind of reminds me, I don't want to be too psychoanalytical here, but it kind of reminds me of your own artistic work in that you're not just recreating a detailed depiction of a portrait, right? You're creating portraits that are reflective of your own perception. So going into these systems, you're not just reporting how it happens. You're like, wait, your perception is acting on it, and it's a perception that's rooted in, I don't want to use it too blithely, but a social justice kind of orientation of this. We need to make things better for people who are supposed to be helped by this, especially if they are societally underrepresented, underprivileged, they don't receive services. So, I mean, again, I don't want to be psychoanalytical, but I'm seeing connecting of dots here.
It's interesting. Learning about myself.
Well, it's what we do. I have a psychology undergraduate major. So that fully, from Central Michigan University, so that fully allows me to exercise my analysis of anybody that I meet. Not that I'm right ever, but I can still do it because I have the degree.
Enjoy it.
But in all seriousness, your degrees aren't limiting your vision because you're not replicating, accepted models from a discipline. I mean, your background is by nature, and I mean this in all the positive way in the world, disruptive. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because you're coming in, like when you and Jenny first started working together, you're both bringing pieces of the puzzle to each other to work together. Your perspective is disruptive because you're not rooted in the world of disability services per se. You're coming from an art background, right? Yeah. I mean, you don't come from design education. You come from outside of that. And I think that this outsider's perspective, this, necessary naivete becomes a crucial element in the kind of work you do, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And we do say that when we're coming to projects in areas where we've not done work before. And sometimes you do see actually there is a challenge whereby sometimes work is commissioned and one of the sort of essential criteria is that you've worked in that sector before. And I'm sometimes like, well, it's sort of missing a trick because that employment example is a really good example because we've never worked in the employment sector before, and that was actually one of the things we said, when we were bidding for that work, was, well, we come to this with a fresh perspective. We don't have any preconceived ideas about it. We will be very sort of active learners, and we will take everything on, but we don't have preconceived ideas. And I do think it's a real strength to be able to do that. And obviously it does take a bit of time to kind of absorb and understand everything. But I do think it's a real advantage actually in a lot of areas to be able to kind of come in with that fresh set of eyes and just go, some of this doesn't make sense. And, you need to explain to me why you do this. And even through the process of people explaining why things happen, sometimes, they start questioning it, and it does uncover things.
One of the exercises I sometimes have my students do is interview like you're an alien. And so pretend you're coming to Earth without any knowledge. You're basically like an alien anthropologist. You're coming to Earth without any knowledge about how things are, how they should be, or your assumptions about how things work. And then interview somebody about something mundane. It could be, football, like American football, or, football in the rest of the world, or it could be how to do something, how to make a meal, whatever it is, because it forces you to suspend your taken for granted assumptions of why things occur. It allows you to get to the next question. Like the 5 whys or root cause analysis is allowing yourself to dig deeper, not just a shorthand. Well, of course this is done. It's done this way because that's how it's done.
And I think sometimes being an outsider, even from a sort of, I think sometimes it's a challenging balance in terms of, especially with different communities, and wanting to, obviously we're very careful. We try to have appropriate staffing for working with appropriate groups and that sort of thing. Right. But at the same time, there is can be a really helpful element if you're working with a community that, you're not terribly sort of familiar with all of their culture or customs, and someone will ask, oh, do you know about X, Y, or Z? And you're like, no, I don't know anything. They're like, right, let me tell you, let me take you back, let me give you all the background that you might not get in other circumstances. So I think it's an interesting one, because I think it's a very careful balance.
I mean, you're basically describing, I don't know that you've ever thought about it this way, or maybe you talk about it this way all the time, but you're basically describing a kind of ethnography. You're basically ethnographers. I mean, even though I don't hear it in your training, but when I teach ethnography, this is what I'm teaching students to try to do. And as one of the things that I tell them that comes with this is a very serious ethical, moral obligation, because your representations matter. Because if you're dealing with underrepresented groups who are not heard and you're making them heard, the ways you make them heard stands for them, right? Yeah. And so I'm sure you and Jenny feel this and talk about this in your work, but I wonder if you could say something about that.
What, in sort of how we try and balance that?
Yeah, but like, how do you think about, we want to be truthful. We want to represent our findings the way that they are, the way we found them. But at the same time, we know that our representations will carry more weight than necessarily the people themselves, because if the people themselves, their voice carried weight, we wouldn't be here because they'd already listened to.
So where possible, we will try and do that in a kind of co-design sort of way, in terms of including people throughout the process, rather than just doing sort of research where you would just take information away and then look at it, analyze it, present. We will try to do it, to circle back or include people in that analysis. So for example, we worked with a charity called Scope. I don't know if you know Scope, but it's a national charity for disabled people. And historically, they were originally set up around to support people with cerebral palsy, but now they are pan-disability. And we did some work with them, specifically with people with cerebral palsy, and there is no one on our team who has cerebral palsy. So the way we worked is to obviously involve and include a lot of people from a range of experiences, all living with cerebral palsy. But a member of the team between us and the charity was somebody who does have cerebral palsy. And we were able to not only sort of take our initial findings to him, run things past him, sense check them, but there's also sort of, they have a panel or a user group as well. So we're able to kind of ensure that we are not missing things or misrepresenting, and we will always try to do that. So the work we did with Asthma and Lung UK was a year-long project, but we formed a team of 5 people living with lung conditions to work alongside us, and they worked alongside us for the whole time. They weren't undertaking the testing of the products we were doing. We had 30 other people living with lung conditions doing that. Their role was to bring that perspective to the analysis, to the planning, to the reporting. So yeah, that's how we try to do it. It's not always easy,
right?
Depending on the scale of the project, the time scale, and if we don't feel like we're the right people, we will, say that. So yeah, but it is, that's how we try and do it, is through including people at every stage, not just going, right, here's the research, now we present. It needs to be like circled back, checked.
I wonder a little bit on that, and just even going back to the story about, people over 50, the intersectionality element of it, because having cerebral palsy is a category, it's an experience, but having cerebral palsy as a man versus a woman, having money, no money, education, no education. I mean, there's all these ways that we can look at the intersectionality of this condition manifesting itself in different life experiences. And so a couple of things come to mind is how not to let a particular representation be the representation. So like a man with cerebral palsy, and also how to, what ways does intersectionality factor into these kinds of projects so that you're capturing as much as possible a broad representation of what that experience is like?
So we, at the recruitment stage, the research planning stage, we plan recruitment very carefully in terms of trying to ensure that we are getting a really broad range of perspectives. Often that's a balance because, it might be that we want an age range of, 18 to 70 in an ideal world. And we want, a range of genders, and to include a range of ethnic backgrounds and experiences and socioeconomic demographics and all of these things. And what we will tend to do is list all of the things that we want to make sure we're considering, that are important considerations that might impact somebody's experience. Then essentially kind of with the client or with people with lived experience, kind of prioritize those as well. So actually, what are the things that are going to have more of an impact on people's experience? And then we will essentially make sort of a recruitment matrix of the things we must cover, the expanse we must cover, and what are the cross sections of that. So if we are including somebody who is has English as an additional language, does that person also, do we need somebody in each of those age categories who has English as an additional language, or do we just need the representation across the whole cohort? So we will then prioritize how we do it. It's not quick.
No. And that's like when I talk to my students about this, I'm like, there are a lot of decisions to make. At least know why you're making them and have it thought out. Don't be caught that, I didn't even think about that when we did these categorizations. It might be, well, you know what? Sure, we'd like to have all these groups, but it's not possible, feasible, whatever. You don't have the time, don't have the access. So we're only going to focus it on these groups. At least have a reason and show that you thought about it.
Yeah.
And that you're aware of it. And that in your results, you're showing that there is this gap that exists.
Yeah. Because
at the end of the day, it's something this complex as what you're describing, there is not going to be a perfect.
No. And I think as long as we will also sort of say we worked with X number of people.
Right.
This was the age range. This was the cross sector. This was what was represented essentially, so that that is clear.
And as a kind of a final question, I may have a bazillion questions, but as a final question, how do you deal with the kind of like the consultant's dilemma of, right, we did this project for this amount of time. It was it was inclusive, it was participatory, it was co-design. We've worked up these great recommendations. Here you go. And then not necessarily have anything either done with it or not necessarily know how it's going to be utilized. You know what I mean? It's situations where you feel passionately about the results. You are confident in what direction they're laying out, but yet it may not be or might never be in your control to actually see them implemented.
Yeah. It's a difficult one. I mean, I think I've got better with it over time. Initially, I think when I first started working in this field, I was just like, but nothing is happening. What's, how do we make sure that it happens? And I think there is an element of having to accept that as a consultant, you just don't have control over that. However, I would say that because of the areas we work in and the topics we work on, and the organizations we work with, if they are commissioning a piece of work to look into something or develop something, they are generally pretty committed to doing it, because they're not often sort of resource heavy industries or areas. It's like they've identified something that they really want to focus on, really want to find a solution or a way forwards, and therefore we are lucky that actually quite a lot of stuff does happen. I mean, it's thrilling when you see it like really quickly, because sometimes it takes a long time depending on the organization. But I would say that I think we're probably lucky in that actually, because of the sector that we work in, some things do happen, and they do happen relatively quickly. But there are, of course, examples where you see things that you've spent ages doing and would work, and they've even been tested sort of beyond us, and they're shown to work. And then because things happen that are outside of everyone's control, structures change, funding streams change, anything can change, things just can vanish. And I think you have to sort of, if you're doing this job, you have to take that as a part of the, part and parcel of it. You get the benefit of being able to constantly learn, constantly be working on different topics, and, always be interested. But you do have to accept that you don't have control of what happens beyond your involvement. And that is just, it's on the balance of the good and the more challenging.
Well, I would imagine that when you go to conferences that people hear about your work and they're very jealous, because this is the kind of work people go into design for. And it's not bad for an art kid. I mean, it's a different palette, it's a different medium of expression, but it still is a creative enterprise that's aimed at touching people in very, emotional ways, and that you're able to do so on a grander scale than you might have otherwise imagined when you were back in art school.
Yeah, it's I am exceedingly lucky, as that, especially that I fell into this. It's just like, well, because I quite often speak to students and stuff, and they're like, well, how did you get into it? It's like, well,
I don't know.
Just luck. Fell into it,
Well, I started drawing portraits of myself.
Yeah.
and I had a hard time reading. So that if you start there. Yeah. And so I think we laid out, if anybody wants to get involved in this kind of work, I think we've laid out the path.
Yeah.
Quite
Literal
clearly.
navel gazing.
Right. And not liking school. It's important that you don't like school, and then you just move forward from there. And then you go to Cambridge, and the rest is history. Yeah. As one does, you just go to Cambridge. And that's it.
As a positive, if you don't like school, it's not the be all and end all.
Well, like I tell folks, I've told students this too, I even tell my own children, Having this outsider's perspective is a crucial skill to have, especially because as even things like AI, and I saw this about AI and art generation, it will create art to the quote unquote norm, which means a base representation of the available information that it's scouring, right?
Yeah.
As more of this technology just reduces to this kind of amorphous norm, the creativity and the insight of the outsider becomes more valuable.
Interesting.
Right.
Like that perspective.
I like it too. That's a story I tell myself. Sometimes I believe it, but I do think it's important that though, be the outlier, right? Be the outlier. Don't reduce to the mean. The regression line, be the outlier, because it's in the space of the outlier that you can see, greater possibilities.
Yeah.
I think that's commonly reflected in your own journey.
Yes. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for taking time, Allie. It was fantastic to learn more about your work, and I really appreciate it. It's fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Co-design and social impact. You can find out more about her work and the work of Humanly in the links in the show notes. And as always, you can share feedback about this episode or any episode at feedback@experiencexdesign.com. Thanks to those who have already shared their feedback. It really is enheartening. Is that a word? Or heartening? Let's go with heartening. Heartening to have you share your thoughts with me and to let me know what you liked about episodes. And I also am eager to hear what you'd like to hear in the future. We have some great shows planned coming up, so you want to make sure to be in the loop. And the best way to stay in the loop is by giving me your email. You can do so by subscribing to the EXD community at my website, experiencexdesign.com. Just give me the email. I will not give it to anybody else, I promise. And I will make sure you get all the EXD news that there is to get. And also while you're there, you can swing over and buy me a coffee to help defray the cost of the podcast. Anything is appreciated and truly is helpful. And as always, as you get ready to plan your next corporate event, your next professional development, your next keynote address, or anything else, make sure you keep me in mind, Gary David, a speaker with humor, insight, charisma, and charm. And I gotta say, the unwow went really well. I might have actually wowed them over at the Customer Alpha event. Got some great feedback, great conversations, and some possible very interesting things coming up. So I'll be excited to share those with you as they happen. You can always check out my speaking profile at GaryConnects.com. And if you want to chat with me, you can do so by emailing Gary at GaryConnects.com or DMing me through LinkedIn. Either way works. And with that, I hope everybody continues to be safe, be kind, be well, and be here for the next Experience by Design. Bye.